Hey, and welcome back to Gaming for Tokens. I'm Marshall, and in this episode, you'll notice something you've probably, well, maybe never seen before. Maya. So I've been making a mention in a couple videos in the past that I wanted to start up a Maya series, and I think I'm actually going to do it. And you're looking and watching the first episode. Oh my god. So, yeah. I wanted to start with some general comments on Maya and kind of what the purpose of this series is going to be, because there's a lot to Maya. It's probably one of the biggest programs I've ever used. It does a lot, and it is intended to do a lot more than I probably even know. So general comments with Maya. In college, we used to refer to Maya as the diva. It is very much that. It because it's such a big program, it has a tendency to crash. Not necessarily saying it's a bad program, though. A lot of people compare it to 3ds Max. Well, a lot of people that use 3ds Max say that Maya is trash and 3ds Max is better, and people that use Maya just kind of quietly sit in the corner and take the abuse. I'm one of those folks that quietly sits in the corner and takes the abuse. 3ds Max is a better program for certain people and for certain workflows and whatever else. I think they're both fine programs. If you know how to use one, you can use it just as strong as you can use the other if you know that one. There are some things in 3ds Max that Maya doesn't do. Pretty much everything that you can do in Maya, you can do in 3ds Max, so it's kind of a weird argument to make that they're the same when they're not objectively, but I think it's a workflow thing. Maya is very good at animation, and I mean, not to say that Max isn't and can't be used for animation, but I think a large chunk of the design behind Maya is centered around animation. You can do modeling in Maya. It's my modeler of choice. The benefits that you get out of modeling in Max, as far as I understand, and this is going to be gobbledygook if you're not if you're not experienced with either program, but in 3ds Max you get smoothing groups and you get a better deformer stack, is what I've been told and what I've seen, and those are pretty much the big leg ups as far as the differences in Maya to Max are concerned. I mean, you could argue that 3ds Max crashes less. I don't know that that's necessarily true. I think it depends on the machine that you're running it on and the type of thing you're doing. But yeah, with those two things, I don't think you get the kind of leverage you expect to out of them in Max, because a lot of these days you're going to build base meshes in Maya and take those to ZBrush or something, and then your smoothing groups are pretty much out. They're null and void at that point, because you're going to be taking your normal information from your normal maps. So I don't know why you need. Anyway, that's a whole different topic. But basically, my argument is that Maya works for the most part, especially if you're just getting started and you're looking for a place to start and you're choosing between the two. I use Maya. Pretty much, I use Maya and ZBrush and stuff like that. I don't use Max. I have used Max a little bit in the past. It's not a bad program. If you want to start there, great, but this video isn't going to help you with 3ds Max, and I probably won't ever do a video on 3ds Max. I could eat those words a year from now when I maybe have picked up the program and have tinkered with it more, but for now, Maya is where I'm going to be. Like I was saying, Maya's strengths lie in animation, I feel, and a lot of people feel that way. Not to say that it can't do other stuff, but I feel like Maya is going to be the modeler of choice for a lot of people doing VFX film work and animation work. That being animation for games and or movies. The VFX stuff is great. Maya has a lot of things built into it that help with compositing on the fly and getting a feel for things. It has... So does Max, but it has Mental Ray built into it, which is an amazing rays-based or ray tracing lighting engine, rendering engine. Very good. I know it pretty well. I might be able to do some videos on that if you guys want. It's not game related at all, but I can. Basically, the only thing that I'm going to be covering in this that is going to translate over to game is hierarchy relation stuff and how to get started in modeling. and probably UV mapping and texture mapping and things like that. That'll probably be, I'll probably cover that too. Everything else in my, maybe some animation and rigging. Forgot about that. But basically, for the most part, most of the things that Maya does will not be translated over to game very well. Things like rendering and lighting and shaders, I guess, paint effects, hair effects, physically simulated stuff, all that stuff. Maya does all that, but none of that's going to translate over to game very well because a lot of that stuff is going to be handled by the game engine if you're going to be doing that. So, generally speaking, it's just going to be models and how they move, and that's what's going to be interpreted through the FBX file to, say, Unity, which is the workflow that I'll be talking about. Eventually, I might do one on ZBrush. I'm not very good at ZBrush. I'm not a ZBrush master, as it were, but I know how to use it, basically. So I might talk about like the workflow on how to get started in that. At the very least, I may do like a one video, but for now, it's going to be all Maya. So that's kind of my apparently 6-minute spiel on Maya. I feel like that kind of needed to be said though before we start. And my skill set in Maya is very, very weird. It's very different than you would expect a skill set of someone who's a game designer to be in Maya. I have a lot of, like I was saying, I know Mental Ray, which is almost like a film renderer. You would use stuff from that rendered in like demo reels and for like VFX and things like that. And I know how to do that. In college for a little while, I was debating about whether I wanted to be a compositor. So I have a lot of, I wouldn't say a lot of compositing knowledge, but I have more compositing knowledge than I don't have compositing knowledge, I guess. So I know the program Composite pretty well. I know Toxic is Composite, and I know Nuke a little bit. I also know what's required to set a scene up for these different, to do different render passes and then stack those render passes on top of each other, all that jazz. I can go into that if I get a request to go into that. I'm not going to if I don't, because there's no point. Game people don't need to know that stuff. But that's where my skill set lies, is a lot of modeling and then exporting that out to be composited. Not saying that I don't know how to do game modeling, because I do. I've needed to know that more than I need to know anything else. But I also know this other compositing side and animation side pretty well. So, jumping right into the program and being done with my weird spiel about me and Maya and our relationship. Our turmoilless relation. Is that even a word? Turmoilless? Whatever. The turmoil of our relationship. This is Maya. And if you've never seen a 3D program before, this is going to get to be looking a lot more complicated before we can start to use it. The first thing that I want to talk about is what we're seeing here. This is a viewport. This you'll see this little white border here that my mouse is tracing. That little gray border, I guess. That is the borders of a viewport. So this is a viewport, including all these little buttons. So all these buttons are linked to this viewport, and all these little menus here and stuff like that. They're all linked to this viewport. We can also call it a pane, a view pane. It's kind of the same thing. They use those two words interchangeably. So if we go to panels, or I guess panel is what I meant to say, not pane. Sorry, starting off great. So this is a viewport. I guess this right here is a viewport, excluding these buttons, but it is a viewport inside of a panel, which includes the buttons, if that makes sense at all. If you think about this whole thing as a panel or a viewport, that should be good enough for now. So you can change the panel over here. That's why I say that it's a panel. I just want to show you where this is. You don't necessarily have to remember this. But, yeah, so this is a panel, and this is a viewport. And this specifically is the perspective viewport. You'll see down here it says persp. And if you're following along and you have Maya open, if you go ahead and click somewhere in the viewport here, just so it's selected, because if you click off of the viewport, sometimes it'll become unselected. The way you determine if it's selected or not is you'll have this white, or this little gray border that I was highlighting. If you hit space while it's selected, you'll notice it goes into four viewport, or 4 panes of viewports. So you have your perspective one, you have your side one, and I'm going to go ahead and turn the grid off so we can see the words on these. Or not, I guess. My mouse has been acting up lately. It's been like double clicking when I mean to click, so sorry if that becomes a thing. But perspective, side, front, and top. You'll see the little green words down there if you can. So these are the different views of our model, of anything that we have on our view here. And so for example, I'm going to create, oh, see, yeah, double clicked. I'm going to create a triangular pyramid type shape thing. And we will see that in our views, we have a top view, we have our perspective view where we can look around at it, and we have our front and our side view. So you don't necessarily have to follow along with what I did there, but I just wanted to show that you get these different views. So this is our 4-view layout, and this is our 1-view layout. This is typically speaking how you will use a lot of Maya. You're going to be jumping between these different scenes, and I'm jumping between these again with space. So if I hit spacebar, I maximize whatever view my cursor is hovering over at that time. So if I'm down here and I hit space, I hover over this one, and I hover over this one, and I hover over that one. I maximize that viewport to become a 1-view layout, and that's spacebar is kind of your toggle between those two. Now, if you hold down space, if you were following along, you may have seen this giant menu pop up, and it probably scared the hell out of you. It's fine. Ignore that for now, and we'll talk about the hotbox, which is what this is called in a minute, in a little while. Viewport controls. You maybe saw me like doing this kind of whole thing, and wandering around the viewport and looking at stuff. These, if you followed the Unity intro video, or at least if you've seen that one, it's the exact same controls. That's another reason why I wanted to talk about Maya and not 3ds Max, is because Maya uses the same, or I guess Unity uses the same viewport navigation controls as Maya. So clicking selects things, obviously. Alt center click lets you pan around. So if you click on your scroll wheel and hold down Alt, or rather Alt first and then center click, you can pan around the viewport. If you Alt left click, you rotate. And if you Alt right click, you zoom in and out. So hopefully that makes sense. Oh, and if you scroll in and out, it also zooms in and out. So Alt right click and scroll wheel zoom you in and out. Scroll wheel click also pans you around, and yeah, that's it. That'll become really, really natural to you eventually, if it's not already. If you've been using Unity for a while, this will be second nature. You can just kind of click around, and typically speaking, Alt is your button though, so if you just hold down Alt, you'll be able to do everything you need to do, which is usually how I end up working. Anyway, so that's viewport navigation. Context menus. I have a list of stuff that I tried to organize my thoughts on this video, so hopefully it's a little better than normal. But so this is our menu set menu. I called it a context menu, but this might be over on animation by default, I think, when you start up Unity. It might not be on polygons. I don't remember. I usually have it set to polygons, so it usually stays there. I don't ever really change this. I might change, well, I switch between polygons and animation, but I usually don't go to anything else. That's a lie. Sometimes I go to rendering. Yeah, sometimes I go to rendering. It's not very often, though. Basically what these are, they change the menus up at the top, you may notice. That's the reason why I didn't start with the menus at the top, because they change per thing we have set here. If we change this to polygons, we get mesh, edit mesh, proxy, so on, so on. If we change this to this, we get animate, geometry cache, create deformers, yada yada. So this changes the set of menus that we have at the top. I'm going to be touching on the hotbox a little bit here and there, but you'll also notice that, see this top menu here, the select mesh, yada yada, all that stuff is the same as up here, right? So if we change this to animation, that should change, I think. Oh, it doesn't, know, because we have the animate one open. Oh well, depending on the configuration of your hotbox, this little menu here will change the things in your hotbox as well. But it doesn't look like it is set like that for me. If it is set like that for you, I forget how to change. Oh, the hotbox controls. We can show all, hide all, and then we can say show dynamics. No, we want to show show command menus. Yeah, kind of. Okay, so this is kind of how you're going to configure your hotbox if you want to, but you don't have to. Oh, all sorts of wonky stuff going on. Anyway, if you want to just use your hotbox, which you should, I can encourage you to do. For now, just maybe do show all. It's going to be kind of an overload of information, but at least everything will be there, and you can kind of follow along. Anyway, my point is, this context menu, depending on your hotbox settings, will also change your hotbox. If you're not worried about the hotbox check, you don't have to be. Don't worry about it. It's not that big of a deal. Yet, at least. It will be an amazing time saver and an amazing thing once you learn how to use it, but until then, don't worry about it. So that's this thing up here, your, what do they call it? Your menu set menu. And Maya's pretty good about being able to hover over things, and it'll give you this whole, like, tooltip thing. So if you ever want to know what something is, just hover over it and go, what is panels? I love it when my examples don't work. Do these work? Nope. Alright, cool. Well, whatever. I told you what a panel was, so it's fine. I guess it only works on the tools, so it probably will work on the select lasso too. Yeah. Anyway, so that's that. We have our toolbox, which is this thing over here on the left. These are a series of buttons that are like recent commands. This is recent command down here, last tool used. And the rest of these are kind of your basic tools. So there's like move tool, rotate tool, and your scale tool. I double clicked again, my mouse. I need a new mouse really bad. So select tool, I'm just going to leave that open. Lets you select things without interfering with things. Because sometimes when you use your move tool, you'll select something and you'll hit the button and you'll be moving something, and that's not okay. Basically, the move tool functions just like it did in Unity, and with the exception of this particular version of Maya, which I should probably mention that I'm running Maya 2014 without any of the hot fixes or anything like that. I'm running like the base version of Maya 2014, so what you get when you just install it. And because of that, I don't have the little boxes that you would get to move things along a plane like you do in Unity. I just have the different arrows. That being said, you can do the plane movement by selecting, and this is kind of counterintuitive, but I love that the option exists, by holding Control and hitting the arrow you don't want to move it along. You can move it along the other two axes. So in other words, by holding Control and the Y arrow, you will move it along the ZX plane, if that makes sense at all. So in other words, Control, green arrow, moves it along the blue and red arrow. So Control is the, I don't want to move it along this axis, I want to move it along the opposite, or invert axes if you like. So Control, invert the move along the Y axis. That may have been more confusing than not, and I apologize if that's the case. Also, if you grab the little, inside that little yellow box in the middle there, it's move it along all axes. So in other words, if I grab that little yellow box, oh come on, I'm also moving it up when I do that. I think. I don't know. I know that happens over here. Like I can move it along in kind of a circle. I believe it's the same for over here. It's just hard to show that I'm moving it up when... Here, let me... No. I don't know. It maybe is only moving it along those two axes, which is unfortunate. But over in the orthographic views, which are what these are, the top, front, and side, it's move it anywhere. It's kind of like a free move. Anyway, that's what the little yellow box means. I think that's the same in Unity, but I think in Unity it's a circle, not a box. Either way. So that's the move tool for the most part. Move it along individual axes, or if you hold Control, move it along the two axes that are not selected. And it's the same over here. If I grab it here and I hold Control, I actually have to hold Control. It looks like a free move. That's funny. Whatever. Maya is a weird program. Oh yeah, and I also noticed that if I noticed that the little box over here changed. Yeah, so now it's doing what I said it was going to do. That's weird. I don't know what's going on with my Maya right now. See how the box isn't orthographic anymore? So like if I go here and I'm... What the hell is happening? See, now the box is not flat. Now if I grab it, it only moves along that axis. But if I come over here, and I select it and I... What is happening? I guess if you control... I guess I'm learning something new. I guess if you control click the center, it'll make it... So see, like, I'm control clicking the arrows. If I just normal click the arrows, it doesn't do it. But if I control click on an arrow here, then it'll only move it along those planes if I select the box in the middle. I guess I do have the option to move along an individual plane. Look at that. Look at that nonsense. That's insane. I didn't know that was a thing. Well, anyway. That's cool. So that's how you do that. So if you control click an arrow, you'll move it along that plane. But if you control click the box in the middle, then it'll go into free move. So if you control click the box in the middle, and then you can just move it however you want. I can like raise and lower and whatever. Weird. Crazy. Anyway, sorry. Big tangent there. I didn't actually realize that I could do that. So anyway, that's the toolbox over here. You have the different... Oh, sorry, that was the move tool. So now we're moving on to the rotate tool. Rotate tool is interesting, and in my version of Maya, it is kind of messed up. I probably need to download a hotfix. I really should, but it's basically your typical rotate tool. You have your you have your three colored circles, which I was trying to show there. There we go. You have your X, your Y, and your Z, which again down here in the corner. Just like in Unity, it's in the top right, but in this one, it's down here on the bottom left. You know, RGB, what is it? RGB X, Y, Z is what I said. So red is always X, Y is always green, Z is always blue. So RGB X, Y, Z. And you have the same thing over here with your X-axis being red and your Z-axis being blue and yada yada. So you'll also notice that there's another white circle around the whole thing, and that is the viewport angle. So you can rotate it around the direction you're looking at it, which is kind of useless in a lot of ways. I've used it before. It's very, very particular. It's a very, very particular instance when it comes up, and usually I use it in orthographic view. So if I want to rotate it along that axis, say it's like all messed up and rotated like this, and I want to rotate it along this axis, I can by going into orthographic view and rotating it along that axis. Ignore what I'm doing. I'm just resetting the object so that I can continue talking about it. Anyway, so that's kind of the rotate tool. There's nothing really special about it. I imagine if you control click, it'll rotate it on the two axes that you don't have selected. Could be wrong. I'm trying to test it. Unfortunately, doesn't look like it's the case. So, yep, those are your axes. It rotates things. If you click on the center of the ball without actually highlighting over a particular axis, which is usually more hard than it has any reason to be, because like right now I'm hovering over the X even though I'm not on anything. This is part of the problem with the rotate tool. Anyway, if you manage to do that, you can actually just rotate it free. You rotate it on all axes at the same time. But usually that's really hard to do for some reason. My rotate tool is all kinds of busted and messed up though, so just a thing to note. You should try it if you can. If you can't, scale tool. Scale tool works a lot like the move tool. You can scale along that axis. Oh, come on. Scale along this axis. I keep hitting the wrong button for that. Sorry, I keep trying to hit Control Z and I keep hitting Control A. So scale along that axis, and then you can scale along all axes. And actually, just like the move tool, if you hold Control on a scale, you'll scale on the two axes that you're not using. So this is actually a really good example of what that Control thing does. So by hitting Control and the Y axis, I scale along the X and the Z. So it's like the inversion of the axis that I have selected. It's kind of counterintuitive, I understand, and it's really, really, really handy sometimes when, like, for example, if I wanted the base of this pyramid to be bigger, I could just make it bigger. Or if I wanted it to be kind of a diamond shape, I now have a diamond shape. So it's really, really handy if you know how to use it, but if you don't know how to use it, then it's kind of a weird, counterintuitive mess. So that's the toolbox over here on the left. You have your move, rotate, and scale, which, by the way, your selection tool, Q, your move tool, W, your rotate tool is E, and your scale tool is R. Now, I know when I first started off, I was like, why the hell isn't rotate R at the very least? It's right there. They could have done it. They didn't. I don't know why. It bothered me when I first started off too, but QWER is select, move, rotate, scale. So the top left of the keyboard there. Anyway, so hopefully that'll help. If you see these tools over here going nuts and me changing stuff, that's usually how I'm doing it. I never hit these buttons. The only time I'd ever hit these buttons is if I double click on them to bring up the settings for the tool, which you'll notice, holy crap, there's a lot of settings for just moving something. I know. We will get there. I hope. For now, just kind of ignore that, and if anything ever goes wonky with the tool, feel free to hit the reset button. Absolutely. And you'll notice things changed. I'm sorry. Hit the reset button, and everything will be okay. And I'm going to do that here too. I'm going to do it here too. So you get to that menu by double clicking on the button over here, and then you just hit reset tool. That will ensure that like if anything ever goes wonky, if you mess with those settings, feel free to mess with them. But if you ever want them back to normal, just hit reset, and that'll reset everything in the tool to its default state. Okay, so that's kind of the toolbox and all the different little basic tools that you're going to use for pretty much everything in Maya. And now I'm going to talk about the shelf, which is what this thing up here is on the top with all these little tabs. So all of basically these are they call this the toolbox, when really this is a better representation of what a toolbox should be in Maya, I think, because all of these are different tools. They're all different like things to do stuff with. So like you have your universal manipulator tool, which is really, really, really cool. So you have all these different things, and you can like scale based off of an individual plane, or you can tip an object based off of a bounding box axis. I think the universal manipulator tool is the coolest tool in Maya almost, but unfortunately, it's kind of this weird thing, and you don't really. I mean, this is also a manipulator tool, but it's like it's not a universal manipulator tool. It's just a manipulator tool, and it does different stuff. And depending on what you have selected that you're trying to manipulate, it does different things. So that's kind of what all of these are. They're tools. They let you do certain things to specific things, and they're good in specific instances, and they're means to an end, effectively. Like, if I wanted to rotate this along this point, well, I can't. I can only rotate it from the middle, right? But I can with the universal manipulator tool. I can totally just grab this thing and rotate it down there. Done. Perfect. Boom. So that's a very specific instance that I would want to rotate it along this vert, but I can. I totally can. So anyway, that's kind of my synopsis of this, and I'll go through each one kind of a little bit. The general category has a lot of your camera manipulation stuff. So if you're going to if you want to translate cinematography into Maya, this is kind of an easy way to, maybe a neat place to start. I don't know. There are better ways to do it than these, but it could be a cool place to start. You have your undo and redo buttons, which are Control Z and Control Y. So you don't really need these, but they're there. You have this, which is delete object, which is also just the delete button on the keyboard. So like if I selected this and hit delete, it goes away. And I just hit undo, which is Control Z, which is also right there. These are grouping and parenting and unparenting and all sorts of jazz, which we'll get into eventually, but basically the hotkeys for it are Control P and Shift P. Usually doing something is Control, and then undoing the same thing is Shift. So, for example, parenting something is Control P, unparenting something is Shift P. So that's a general rule of Maya. I'm not going to say that Maya doesn't follow that rule to a T, but it generally speaking tries to follow that rule. And yeah, this thing brings up the hypergraph, which we might talk about eventually. It's kind of it's not really something that beginner folks would need to know, so I might wait. This is something I never actually used before. Select hierarchy and combinations. That's kind of a complicated thing, but basically the hierarchy system, if you've seen the video where I talk about hierarchy in Unity, hierarchy is when you parent things to other things, so you have a parent-child hierarchy. This also uses a parent-child hierarchy. So, yeah, I guess if I selected this and I said select your hierarchy, it would select the parent-most object, so it'd select it and everything in its hierarchy. If that doesn't make sense to you, hopefully it will in the future, but I've never actually used this button before. Select by object type, again, I've never used that. I imagine select by object type would be, because there's different types of objects. This is a polygon object. There are curves. There are NURBS objects. There are things like that. Those are all types of objects. This is a polygon object because it's made of polygons. So I imagine that that's what that is. This is probably, yeah, select by component type. Component types are things like faces, vertices, edges, things like that. Things that make up polygonal objects. Those are all components. There's also CV CV points, I think, for curved points. I think it's, what is it? Is it curved vertice point? I think is what that stands for. Anyway, there's going to be, we might get to curves eventually, but I'm going to talk a little bit about them in the next tab. But components are things that make up objects, if that makes sense at all. Components of objects. Paint selection tool is exactly how it sounds. It gives you a brush and you can paint select things, which right now we're selecting verts and I haven't even talked about that yet, so I'm going to stop that. I'm talking about the universal manipulator tool, and the other manipulator tool is very specific and weird. It has a lot to do with deformers. I think I only ever use it when I'm using a deformer, so I can't think of another instance when I would use it at the moment, but just know that you would never really use this unless you're using a deformer, and you don't even know what deformers are yet, probably. So, I mean, that's how often you're going to use it. So anyway, that's the general tab. Curves. Oh, actually, hold on. The help tool. Oh, no, that goes to help. That's not a tool. I swear to God there was a help tool in Maya. I might be thinking of it over the program. Anyway, curves. Curves are lines. I want to make a line that does stuff. Typically speaking, you'll see these used a lot in animation rigs. I've used them a lot for reference for things. So like if I wanted a radius on something, I would use a circle, and I would just define that radius, which we'll get to how to do that in a little bit. But yeah, you can select them and move them around just like you would move around anything else. So they're just lines. Think about them like what is it? Well, 3D programs like Maya and Autodesk software in general, more 3ds Max actually, comes from AutoCAD. It comes from computer-aided drafting software. So all this stuff comes from drafting. I did drafting in high school, and the way that I look at this is a shape, and this is a line. So a line is going to be like, I drew this with a pencil, and this is going to be like a completed shape that is finished. Like this is a reference line, and this is a finished object. Anyway, kind of an aside, but if you're into drafting, this might make a little more sense. These are great as reference tools, and they're great to sometimes use to get polygons out of, because again, we're only going to be talking about polygon modeling. These things are specifically part of the surfaces and NURBS side of things, which is CAD CAM and drafting stuff for making 3D printing and that sort of thing. So, well, these days making 3D prints and engineering stuff like that, but typically speaking, Maya isn't really used for that. I mean, it can be, but it's usually not the program of choice. So anyway, that's kind of what a curve is. You have different types, and you can make your own. This is you do points, and then I think you can join them into a circle somehow. I forget how, but anyway, so that's that. And if you want to go back on curves, you just hit delete button and then you can pick up where you left off. So like, oops, I didn't mean to curve it that much. So yeah, and then when you're done, you hit enter. Typically speaking in Maya, if you're putting multiple points down, delete is like undo that last point, and then enter is I'm done. And then it creates the object. So for example, if I'm making a curve and I hit delete, I'll go back, and if I hit enter, then I'm done. I'm done with that tool, and I've made my curve. This is drawing a curve, and it'll kind of, I don't know, it gives you your wonky curve that you drew. I wouldn't say that that's the best thing in the world. It could be good for references, and it could be good for other things, but I don't know. 3-point circular arc. So start here, go here, go here. Give me a circle based on these 3 points. This can be extremely handy if you know how to use it. I don't know. I use curves a lot. I use a lot of tools that a lot of people that do modeling and stuff probably would shy away from, just because they've been told that they're bad and they've used them incorrectly and then said, wow, these tools are terrible, and then they stopped using them and they never even thought about them again. Anybody out there who's done any modeling in Maya or 3ds Max, if I say I actually honestly do use booleans every now and then, they freak out. They're like, oh my god, you use that crap? Well, I use it as reference, and then I model around it, and I fix the problems with the geometry. It's kind of the mentality of you can use really messy tools to block stuff out. As long as you clean up your mess, you're fine. And I look at cleaning up messes in Maya as kind of therapeutic in a weird way, because I'm a weird person. But anyway, so that's kind of that's curves in a nutshell. I use curves in the same way. I use them as reference tools and stuff like that. A lot of polygon modelers don't even think to use curves or even surfaces or anything like that, because why? We model in polygons, but you can convert most of the stuff to polygons. So this is a curved, a surface sphere. You'll notice that, like, so here I'm gonna do something really quick to compare these two. What do we have here? We have, so you can ignore what I'm doing or try to follow along if you want. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think those are the same now. Oh no, 1, 2. What is that? 3? Yeah, okay. So, here we go. I know this looks kind of weird. These are both spheres. Weird, right? Oh, no, wait. Oh, I did it wrong. This is actually going to be 4. There we go. So these are both spheres. And they have the same number of points, right? So we have one at the top, we have a band, we have a band, we have a band, and we have one at the bottom. We have one at the top, band, 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 one at the bottom. We have... what is it? I counted 8, so 8, yeah. 8 across the poles, so we have 8 and 8 around it. Yet they look very different, don't they? One looks like crap, this one, and the other one looks like a sphere. And for some reason, the polygon modeling seems to be winning in the industry. It's how games are made, it's how a lot of animations these days are made. And yet it's the one that looks bad in this comparison. That's weird, right? Well, NURBS is the... I don't know. It uses kind of an approximation model, I guess. So it kind of like vector stuff. NURBS is the vector of 3D, I guess, if you want to think about it like that. So this has a point here, and it 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 kind of knows the general arc of this curve, so it kind of figures out that face, you'll see there, the edge of that, follow the solid edge. See how it disappears behind that face? You'll never have that happen on a polygon object, because it's very, very rigid points, and it follows a very strict geometry of these are faces, edges, and these are vertices. This follows like a a geometry of curves more so than polygon modeling does. So like, this is a curve that goes from here to here based on an equation, and that just kind of happens in a circle, which is also a curve that is founded in an equation. So we know where the object is and where the object isn't based off of this series of equations. This is like, here's a position, here's a position, here's a position, make a triangle. Done. So polygon modeling is much simpler and much easier to equate than a NURBS model is. So if you ever have the question of why the hell hasn't games gone the way of NURBS if NURB looks so much better, that's the reason why. It's harder. It's much more inefficient to calculate than polygon modeling is. It's also much harder to do anything with because it's a lot more finicky in a lot of ways. It's also easier to break. It's easier to get bad information because all the equations are more complicated. If you don't put your curves in the right place, things will get weird. It's harder to join things together exactly because there aren't really vertices. There are, but there aren't. Because everything is kind of an approximation. Everything is kind of an equation to an end. Rather than here, it's just a series of positions. Everything's absolute. Everything is easy to find. So anyway, that is surfaces in a nutshell, as opposed to polygons, which most of you should be familiar with, I think. If you've never actually seen if you've never done any modeling before, we're going to basically largely be ignoring surfaces because there's no reason to really learn them, but they're here if we need them. Now, the interesting thing is that a polygon cylinder and a NURBS cylinder look very similar, and I think that's really fascinating to talk about, but I could talk about this for a long time. I won't. I got my start in NURBS modeling. I used to know a lot more about it than I do now, just because it's been many years. But NURBS modeling has its place. Its place is not in games, is basically the gist. So this whole this whole surface tab, probably for the most part you can ignore it. You might not ever use it, but play around with it if you want, and you'll learn that it's kind of weird. Polygons, kind of talked about those. These are your primitives that Maya comes with. There's no teapot polygon button, unfortunately. I know if you're from Max, you'll go, oh, dang it. Oh, if you're not from Max, you have no idea what the hell I'm talking about. There's a teapot button in Max where you just click and you drag and it creates a teapot. It's pretty funny. But anyway, so this is a sphere. It doesn't normally look this crap. Usually it actually looks like a decent sphere. See? Sphere. You'll notice it has a lot more points and a lot more surfaces and stuff like that. This high poly of a sphere, you probably would never want to use in game. Unless it depends. I can't say that. It depends. But this is a high poly sphere. You have your cube, which you drag. So, okay. You click one of these buttons, and then you click in the viewport and drag, and it will create one. Now, if you click on this and you drag up here, it'll create one up there. But this is deceiving. You're not actually creating it in the sky above this. You're creating it next to it. I don't know if I just shattered someone's illusion or not, but everything that you create is on the grid of the view that you're looking through. So because we're in the perspective view, and again, I'll do that again just to blow people's minds again. Oh, there we go. So this looks like it's floating above the grid, but it's totally not. It's like a side. It's next to the grid. But it is on the grid. It's just next to this display of a grid. So for example, if we're over here and we open up the grid and we create it here, it is creating it in the middle of or on that grid. So that grid splits it in half almost. Because that's the middle of the sphere. That's where it creates it from. And we can also kind of see that over here and here. We see that it creates it on that thick black line. So that's kind of just a general knowledge thing. If you create an object like a sphere, I hate my mouse right now, in perspective, and you think you're creating it down there floating in the abyss, you're not. You're creating it on the plane of existence that is in that view. Creating a cube is similar to creating a sphere. You click on the grid and you drag, but you're not done. You also have to drag the height, and these little tooltip things will come up and talk to you. So that's a drag twice operation. You drag once to create the base, and then up again to create the height. It's the same thing with a cylinder. Click, drag, and you have a cylinder. And I believe the cone is the same too. You click once to make the base, and click up again to do the height. It's just like it's like a cylinder, except the top is only one vert. That's basically the difference there. Planes are similar. You just drag out once and you're done, because it's just like creating the base of a cube. And so on. The torus is a cool one. You drag out to set the radius of the torus, and then you drag oh, okay. My mouse is barfing all over the place here. Drag out to create the radius of it. Drag again to give you the radius of the torus itself. So the first radius that you drag out is going to be kind of the middle of this donut, and then the next is the width of that donut. What is this? Combine? Oh, okay. So you also have a what do they call this? A polygonal pipe. It's basically a in my head I call it a cylinder torus. It's not what it is, but you create it just like you do a torus, except I think there's 3 clicks in this one. So you drag once to create the radius, you drag again to set the height, and then you drag again to set the width. So this specific primitive is actually really useful for a lot of things. Typically speaking, I just end up creating a cylinder, and then I just carve a hole in it because I'm stuck in my ways and I have my own habits. That's just a habit that I have. But these are cool. There is an ungodly amount of extra little tools and things in here. Separate, chamfer. Another separate? What is the difference between... Oh, weird. I guess these are different. Oh, that's extract and this is separate. Oh, sorry. They function probably about the same, depending on how you use them. There's interactive split tool, which is what we'll be using that a lot. Merge tool, we'll be using that a lot. Reduce, we probably won't ever really use that much. I use the sculpt geometry tool almost an embarrassing amount. I use it for a lot of weird things here and there. I usually use it to sort out my geometry messes for me instead of actually doing it manually, because it just seems a lot faster. I also use a lot of collapse. Collapse is something that we'll talk about. All of this stuff in the polygons tab, we're going to go over it maybe not all of it, but most of it we're going to go over to some capacity in probably the next video or two. And I know this is a long video already. The intro videos for programs are going to be kind of long on this channel, just because I want to do a strong base and then build up from there. So the polygons tool I'll be going over, polygons tab, a lot of these tools in the polygons tab I'll be going over in future videos when I talk about how to carve geometry and how to create new geometry and things like that. The extrude tool is probably the most vital of tools in our polygon modeling arsenal. These two tools specifically, the interactive split tool and the extrude tool, are two of the most important. Anyway, deformation is cool, and it always gets people excited when they see what it does. So we have our cylinder here. I'm gonna do some stuff to it. We'll do 10. So I've divided this cylinder up, and we're going to deform it based off of this. And so again, because we're using deformers, is the only time I ever use this tool, the manipulator tool. But basically, deformers do this kind of stuff. They allow you to bend an object. This is a bend deformer, so it allows me to bend this object based off of these parameters, and I can cut off how far I want it to bend down this. I can say how much I want it to bend. And the coolest thing about this deformer is that it's world position based. So as I move the object through the world, it will bend across that object. I really like deformers for this aspect in animation. It is the coolest thing you can do, and it'll usually throw people off because they're like, "How'd you do that?" It's like, "Oh, I just put a deformer in there and then moved the object. That's all I did." Now that being said, things will explode and do weird things if you move them on the wrong axis. Now Now, the bend deformer is specifically a single axis thing unless you make it a multi-axis thing. Because right now this is on the XY plane. So if I move this over here and then I take the deformer and I rotate the deformer, it starts to act wonky, right? So this kind of acts almost like a twist in a weird kind of way. Likewise, if I take the deformer and I move the deformer, similar things happen, right? Where it bends the object based off of the placement of the deformer. And if you delete the deformer, then it ignores anything ever happened to it. Deformers are neat. I like deformers a lot. Here's another... Ooh, okay. A thing opened up on the other window. Do I actually have a deformer there now? No, I don't. Okay. So if I click on this one... Sorry, my mouse is being a bastard. So I get this, which is a... what is it called? It's a flare deformer. So basically I get to determine... Oh, give me the thing. Give me the thing. Gravitromer. There we go. Okay, so I can drag these things out, and I can scale stuff based on wonky I don't know, circles. I guess as a way to say it. And if I pull this, then it'll pull in the center. So I kind of can create hyperboles. Is that what those are called? I probably just embarrassed myself. God, what are they called? Oh, I forget what those are called now. The graphs that do this. Oh, I forget. Anyway, that's basically what it is. Parabola, not hyperbole. I'm insane because I know what a hyperbole is. I thought, I don't know what I thought. Anyway, this is a parabola. A parabolic hyperbole. A parabolic hyperbole. Anyway, so yeah, that's a flare deformer, and all the deformers kind of do something similar. The coolest one, I think, and this would be absolutely useful for animation, and you can immediately see why. But you have to have... That's the other thing with this, is you have to have really high poly geometry for these to matter at all. A lot of the time. Unfortunately. That's usually why... These can be used for a base in a game. But they probably can't be used for... Oh, come on. Work. So this is a ripple. It might not be behaving as I want it to at the moment. Either way, it's a sine, and it will... It's a ripple. So like the icons up here they show like what they are, and this is a nonlinear sine. They deform to this sine. So maybe the sine is too big or something, but basically it'll manipulate the vertices based off of that sine. So if you select certain vertices and then do that, whatever. Yeah. Long story short, I'm getting too in depth with this. You have a squash, you have a twist, you have all sorts of fancy little things here. You also have the nonlinear wave, which is probably what I was trying to do just now. Now that I think about it. Actually, no. You know what? We're gonna go cube. And we're going to go to the channel box. We're going to select this. We're going to do 30, 30, 30. And we're going to do, we're going to show what some of these do. Because why not? I got all the time in the world. I don't have anything to do today. This is what Twist does. Sorry if you're not wanting this today, but... So let's go ahead and... I use the twist tool actually quite a lot because it creates really cool shapes and stuff. But basically, yeah, it just twists your geometry. I mean, self-explanatory, right? The wave tool, yeah, sure. Do we have wave? Amplitude. Give me amplitude. Give me offset. give me anything? Min radius? Position drop off? Anything? Oh man, it's being a jerk. Maybe if I move this up. Maybe if I've never actually used this one before. Maybe I should actually stick to things that I know. Crazy talk, right? Oh well, Wave does what the thing says. If you figure it out, great. Sculpt Deformer is pretty cool. Oh, maybe if I actually, I think my mouse acting up is really messing with me here today. Sculpt Deformer is interesting because it does this kind of nonsense, and you can edit the position of this. So you can effectively have like an object trying to get out of another object, and we can define the size of what's trying to get out of the object. So like think about it like you have you have this cube, which is a cube made of something soft, and you have something on the inside trying to get out, and you animate it doing this kind of nonsense. Like it's trying to push against this wall. That could be really cool and useful. And you can just animate this deformer position instead of having to animate each individual vertice and all sorts of that nonsense. It gets to be a mess. Blend shapes are used a lot in animation and rigging. They're really, really cool and handy. Wire tools, I've never used it. I think what it is, you create a curve and then you tell the object to follow along that curve. I think that's kind of what it is. I could be wrong. Or to avoid it or something. I don't know. But yeah. Soft modification tool, kind of like the Sculpt Deformer tool, but different. I think this is just, well, screw it. Let's hit it and see what happens. Yeah, it's very, very similar to that. See how we have the, but it'll, yeah. So it's just modifying our geometry in a kind of a soft way. Yeah. So there we go, and it's there's all sorts of different things associated with it. Anyway, they're just deformers are ways of making your models react to them in a fancy way. I'm probably dragging on a little bit more than I need to. Sorry about that. I'll try to pick up the speed. Animation tool is where you find a lot of your rigging stuff and a lot of your keyframing and that sort of thing. How to create bones, how to do skin weights and meshes, skin weights on meshes, that sort of thing. We'll get there. Dynamics are particle effects. A lot of like emitters and how to make things collide with things and how to do like wind effects and shattering and all that sort of stuff. Probably won't ever touch any of this because again, all of this stuff doesn't translate over to Unity, doesn't translate over to game very well. Mostly because game engines have their own particle system, so we don't need dynamics and particle systems in this. Unless we're going to bake out the animation, in which case it could be a thing, like a shatter could be used, but otherwise probably not. Rendering, again, probably won't be used unless we talk about compositing and that sort of thing. Different shaders, different lighting, different cameras, that sort of stuff doesn't really translate over to game very well, but it's really cool and fun to play with in Maya. I enjoy it a lot. It's been a long time since I've done it, but a long time. It's been maybe a year or two, but I enjoy it. Paint effects we will probably not talk about. I suggest you play with them. They amazed me when I was learning about Maya. Hey, look, a teapot button. We can paint teapots. Teapots. Anyway, I know I said there wasn't a teapot button, but it's because paint effects don't really count. They're not really anything that we can legitimately use. There's an extra step to turn all this stuff into geometry, but it's not the kind of geometry you want, and it's not... None of this stuff is good, basically, is the gist. A lot of people see the paint effects and they get kind of starry-eyed when they start, and they're like, oh, this is amazing because I can paint hair or whatever I want. Like, here's hair. Hair blonde. Let's paint some hair. Now we have hair. We have blonde hair. Great. So you can just paint that on a character model, call it good. No. No, you can't. I wish it were that easy, but it's absolutely not that easy. Paint effects are, typically speaking, 9 times out of 10, they give you really bad geometry, and they're not usable in the paint effects state that they come in, for game, at least. Toon. This is how you do toon shaders. So if you're interested in doing some Maya animation and exporting out cartoony looking animations, this is where you want to start for your shading needs. Stuff like toon outlines, stuff like specific toon outlines, painting on outline color and shape and all that stuff, and then also how you want the shading to look. I've used a lot of this stuff for compositing. Some of it's really, really cool and handy, and it gets you a really nice stylized look sometimes. Just know that these shaders are, I would consider these shaders advanced shaders. I would consider the ones in rendering and the base shaders to be not advanced necessarily, but they can be as advanced as you want them to be. But these come by default with like a huge list of stuff you got to mess with to make them look kind of decent. Well, decently what you want, what you expect to get out of it. Muscle, if you're a rigger, this is going to be where you're going to be spending a lot of time once you learn how to rig. Muscle is really, really cool, and I've looked into it a lot, but I've never actually done it. Basically, you model out the muscular structure of your character, and then you define that as muscles and say where they connect and where they pull, and then you can. So like when you raise up your arm, your bicep flexes, and that can be now represented in your 3D models with muscle. It's very, very cool stuff. But I've never messed with it. I've looked into it. I've watched videos and tutorials and things on it before, and I said, wow, that's really cool. And I'm not a rigger, so it doesn't really mean anything to me. But I know basically I know enough rigging to get by, but I don't know enough to do anything important with it, I guess. Anyway, fluids, kind of like dynamics, kind of like particles. Think like snow is a particle effect, but smoke is a fluid. Fluids are fluids, so air is a fluid, water is a fluid, that kind of thing. But particles are individual flakes of things that are falling or interacting, or however you want to look at it. So like if I hit this button right here, it'll create an ocean. Or well, maybe not that one, but you can create an ocean with this stuff. You can create clouds, you can create smoke, you can create fire, all with fluids. And they're really cool, and sometimes you can use these for game, because you can create like a candle flame, and then you can render out a 48 frame animation, and then you can use that as a sprite animation in games. So these can translate to game, but typically speaking they don't. Not in the form that they come in. You have to like export them out as like a special thing. Fur, again, kind of like paint effects, not really useful for game artists, possibly useful for animators if you're staying in Maya, but it's the same thing with end hair. End hair and fur are similar in the way that they don't really translate to game. End cloth, the only time end cloth would translate to game is if you are, say that you modeled a really nice dining room table and you want to put like a beautiful tablecloth on it, then you can use end cloth to make that tablecloth drape over the table, and then it's a fixed mesh, and then you can export that fixed mesh off. End cloth is effectively the cloth simulation for Maya. It's very, very cool, and I played with it quite a bit. You can also use it for modeling help, so you can make cloth terrible, and then you can beat the hell out of it and then make it like dynamically torn, and so you don't actually have to model those things. Personally, if you're doing that, you're approaching modeling in the wrong way. Modeling shouldn't necessarily be, let's see how realistic and simulationist we can make it. It's an art form. You should be modeling it like you're sculpting. I mean, that makes sense to me, but a lot of people that doesn't make sense to. Very similar in this way. But we might talk about this eventually. If I get a request to, I will. There's not a lot to it as far as I know. Well, I don't know a lot about it is what I meant to say by that. I know how to set up colliders, I know how to set pinpoints, and I know how to make things go. And that's basically that's all I need to know, so that's all I do know. And then there's a custom shelf. And the custom shelf is where you're going to put your custom buttons, the things that you... like if you make a tool, you make a button that does a thing, it'll go here, probably. And that's the shelf. The shelf is... it's, like I said before, it's basically your toolbox. Even though this is called a toolbox, this is where your tools live. And a lot of this stuff is represented in these menus in the hotbox too, so this is kind of an inconvenient way to get them, and some people that are so familiar with Maya don't even necessarily use the shelf anymore. They get rid of it from the UI. They just completely You can get rid of stuff by going up here to the heads-up display and UI elements and stuff and just getting rid of stuff. There's your shelf. Boom, gone. Doesn't exist anymore. Oh, come on, mouse. There we go. But yeah, so the shelf is a handy thing for beginners. Typically speaking, the more advanced you get, the less you're going to use it, because you'll learn the hotkeys and you'll learn how to use the hotbox more. But for starting off, don't be ashamed to use it. Just don't get in the habit of it to the point where it becomes a hindrance and you don't realize it's a hindrance. That's a bad state to get in. The next thing I want to talk about is the channels box, which, if you haven't messed with anything in default in Maya, this is how you start, right? This might not be on polygons, this might be on animation, and that might be on general, but typically speaking, if we go to polygons and we go to here and we create an object, just create anything you want. I'm going to create a pyramid, but you can create a sphere or a box or whatever you want. You start off by default in the attribute editor, which is something that I can talk about. I might talk about it at the end of the video, but the channel box is more important for you. And the way you switch between them is there's tabs over on the right and left here, or the right, and they're above and below each other. So if you're on the attribute editor, that's kind of, I guess I'll talk about it now. That's kind of the attributes of the object. So you have like the different nodes that make up the object, which is really advanced. And that's, well, you can edit the attributes of it that way. There are also these little buttons up here, scroll over. Essentially think about this like a scroll bar. And this is also, Lambert 1 is the material that is on the object. So this is also how you get into materials. The channels box is more important for what we want to know today, though. So if you don't understand the attribute editor, that's fine. These are the translates and rotates and scales of our object. So if you follow the Unity videos, you know exactly what this is. This is a transform. But if you don't follow the Unity videos, this is the world coordinates, because this is a three-dimensional grid. So these are the world coordinates of the object. This is the scale in degrees of the object. And this is the scale in scale units. So everything starts off at 1. 1 is your neutral state, and 0 is 0. So if we do 0, zero, it stops existing basically. But if we do 1, then it's there. If we do 0.25, it's 0.25 big. It's kind of a percentage, I guess, is a good way to think about it. And then there's visibility, which is a 0 or a 1 value, or an on or an off. So the way that you can do this is by typing in 1, 0, and then it changes it to off, or you can type in the word on. I believe you can even type in like 8, like a higher number, and it defaults to, so 0 is off, and then 8 is also off. Okay, so it is a 0 or a 1. So anyway, that just toggles whether or not it's visible, and that's kind of important for animators more than it is for modelers, because you can key this value and you can animate whether something is visible or not. So it's kind of, I've used it in animation before, but not all that often. So anyway, this is our attribute editor. This is where we're going to be tinkering with things like, say, the stats of our pyramid that we made, or that I made. So if you make a pyramid, you get the number of sides. How many sides do you want it to have? Come on, can I please? I can't mess with that. Oh, it's a drop-down menu. My mouse was being stupid. So I can make a 3-sided pyramid if I want, or I can make it a 5-sided pyramid if I want. And then we can say how many subdivisions do we want on the height. So subdivisions, if you don't know what those are, if I do 2, that is a subdivision. Subdivision is a how many rings of geometry do you want to divide up the top, the upward edges of the pyramid. So this is an upward edge, right? That's an edge that goes up. And how many times do you want to divide that by a perpendicular edge, or a horizontal edge in this case? If we have 2 of them, then we have 1 at the bottom and 1 here. So if we do 5, then we'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the caps is similar, but if we change this to 2, we won't really see anything change up here. We saw the shading change because it's on the bottom. So now we have 2 here, because that's the cap of the pyramid is at the bottom, which is going to sound interesting because you usually think of a cap as at the top, but this makes more sense if we were using, say, a cylinder, not a sphere, a cylinder there. we have the radius of it, so we can change how big the thing is. We have the height of it, so how tall it is. Warp. And we have subdivisions on the axis. So this is the axis of it, right? The center, the point in the middle. So how many things around do we want? How many divisions around do we want? Starts off at 20, which is a lot. So I'm going to decrease to 8 just for the purposes of this. Subdivisions on the height. Maybe we want 4 across the height of it. And maybe across the cap we want 2, not 1. So now we end up with this shape. And this is useful because now we can start to edit this object. For example, we can take this face and we can move it up, and then we can take this face, these 2 faces, 3 faces maybe? Okay, mouse. Alright, mouse. Calm down. I hate this mouse. We take this face and we move it down, and we start to actually, we're editing the shape, right? So we can extrude out, and I know that you guys don't know anything about what I'm doing right now and you're not following along. That's perfectly fine. I'm just trying to, yeah. So this was a cylinder, and then now we have this, whatever the hell it is. But we can only get that if we have the underlying geometry to support such a change. I'm undoing everything I did. There we go. So this was what we started with, and then we used the pre-existing lines that we had drawn on the geometry to get whatever the hell I decided that I wanted to make there. So the channels box encompasses the inputs of what we've done to it already. So if we decide that I want to take this and I want to bevel this edge, which I know that I maybe just blew your mind by opening up that menu, and I'm sorry. But we want to take our beveled edge here. Looks like that. And we want to edit that later. We can just go into the poly bevel and we can say, well, we don't want to offset by 0.2, we want to offset by 0.3. So we can make that change and we call it good. Now this is where Maya starts to get a little finicky. In 3ds Max, you have what's called a deformer stack. We talked about deformers up here. They're different. We sort of. Maya deformers are different than 3ds Max deformers. 3ds Max deformers are inputs in Maya, which are what these are. And whenever you hear someone talk about the deformer stack in 3ds Max, they're probably talking about something similar to this inputs menu. I say similar because it's not the same. If we want to go back to edit this poly cylinder, and we maybe want to say, you know, I don't like that there's only 8 subdivisions. Maybe we should make that 12. See how it gets all weird? And like now this geometry doesn't make any sense, and everything's kind of broken looking, and our poly bevel isn't there anymore, and maybe we want to make this like, you know, 0.5, and it increases the bevel there. It's because of the order of operations being applied to the object. I mean, they make sense for Maya, but they don't make sense for anyone else. So if we change this back to 8, suddenly it makes sense again. It's because of the way that Maya stores the arrays of vertices and edges and things like that on an object. Because we changed the number of vertices on the object, everything that was applied after that is still applied to the vertices in the order that they were stored before. So by adding more of them randomly to this list, the vertices that are being, the changes the poly bevel is being applied to don't change. The slots don't change, even though the verts in those slots did change, if that makes sense at all. So it's a flawed system. The input system doesn't really work the way you'd expect it to, and that's kind of a downside. So basically, the deformer stack doesn't work that way. It works on, I believe, I don't know how it works, but it works the way that you'd expect it to. We could go in 3ds Max, we could go back to the poly cylinder and change it, and it would reflect across fine. I think it's just a different system and a different methodology for like approaching how things want to be. I don't know how things are done. That is one of the few things where I go, okay, Max has that on Maya for sure. Basically, the gist in Maya is be sure of what you want when you have it and know how to reconstruct things if you break it. So, for example, if I wanted more edges around this, I would have to sacrifice my bevel. I would have to go back and say, okay, I don't want my bevel anymore. I have to get rid of this bevel. And now I can start to edit the cylinder again. And that's kind of a downer. It's kind of a sucky thing that exists, but it exists. It's a thing. So that's something that we have to know. But that's the inputs menu over here. The shapes thing is if we have multiple of them. So if I know I'm doing stuff that you guys don't know how to do yet, and that's fine. I'm just kind of going over what the UI stuff is, and then we can talk about how to do the stuff that I'm doing. So if we select all three of these, the shapes are what this channel box is. Oh, I guess not. Shapes is the name of the object that we have currently selected. You'll also notice, well, I won't talk about that, but the shapes is the object that we're currently looking at, and if you have multiple of them selected, it doesn't list all of them, which is a stupid thing. I think that's bad, but that's just the case. Yeah. So that's what that is. I actually largely ignore this. I don't even know why it's displayed here, to be honest. The inputs is really the only thing you need to worry about, and then these things are the positional values of it. So if we change these all to 0, then it'll go to the world origin, like you would expect it to. And you can select more than one of these. So if I select all three of the translates and then hit 5, it'll go to 5 on all of the translates, which is really cool. So if you wanted all three of these to be 90, you just click and drag over them and then set them to what you want them to be, and then there you go. So again, I mostly use it for zeroing things out. So if I select the rotates and I hit 0, and I select the translates and hit 0, and you can select, that is not what I wanted to happen. So if I select all of these and I do 0 on that, then it'll zero out all 6 of those values for me, which is really, really handy. So that's that is the channels box, and I think that will probably conclude this episode. I had a couple more things that I wanted to talk about, but I'll talk about the time slider really quick. That's the thing I can talk about. So this thing at the bottom down here is the time slider, and it is what it's like the timeline for Maya. So if you're an animator, you know exactly what that is. The gist of it is, if I make 2 keyframes, I make one over here and I make one over here, and I drag along this, it will now move along between those keys. And if I maybe make one in here, now it'll move from there to the second or the third one. So it'll go 1, 2, 3. That's all this is it's just a timeline. If you're familiar with Flash or you're familiar with any other type of animation software, there's not a whole lot of them out there, then you'll kind of already know how this works. I was keying things by hitting S. That is the only time you will ever see me hit the S key to key something. I think it's terrible. S keys everything on the object. Anything in the channels box, it keys it. So you see all these turned red, or like salmony orange red. All of those are now keyed, so now we have a bunch of garbage key information that we don't need anymore, when really all we're moving it along is the X and the Z. So we only needed to key this one and this one. We keyed all of them. That's bad form, and you should never do it. But it's worth noting that you can actually key multiple things, right? So maybe if on 12 we wanted to key this up to 2, and we key that. That's how you're supposed to key things, is by right-clicking on it, hitting key selected. Now when we go along this, it'll scale up and then scale back down. So animation in Maya is actually it's pretty easy, and you can pretty much key anything you want. As long as you're not worried about it going out to game. Animation from Maya to game can sometimes get a little tricky. But anyway, that's the time slider, and that was a pretty easy thing. This down here are the ranges. So this is the range that we're looking at currently, and the range of the slider itself, because we have a scroll bar across the bottom to go to 48. Okay, wow. What are you doing? All right. So we have 1 to 24, and then if we drag this thing over, we have from 25 to 48. And if you're familiar with, say, an editing software like After Effects or what is the other one? There's a big one everybody uses, and I forget what it's called. Probably Toast. It would also be this way. I've never actually used Toast, but a lot of editing software has this where they have like a slider that is adjustable, so we can grab this little box and then move it and see all 48 or just see 24 or whatever. But that's what this does down here too. Or if we wanted to see 48, we can see 48. If we wanted this to go to, say, 360, we can have 360 frames in our animation and scroll between them and key along them however we want to do this. I believe Maya defaults to 24 and 48. I could be wrong. Also, this is the other end. We can have negative frames, so we can have it go to -10. And you'll see this a lot in game animations, where they'll have at least a -5, I think. A lot of places have a -5. And the reason for that is that those are base poses. So -1 will usually be a T-pose, and -2 will usually be like default attack pose 1 or whatever. And default 3 will be default response or recoil 1 or whatever. So you'll have like these default poses for things to go to if they don't have any animation for. So you see that a lot in games, but in animation you might. Usually not, though, because negative frames are usually kind of a bad thing to have in animation, just because they're kind of, again, they're more of that useless, muddy information that we may or may not ever use, so why have it? So yeah, in the next video I'll be talking a little bit about getting some geometry in the scene and carving it up and getting it ready to be modeled on, which is, I think, what most people in games want to get into. They want to know how to use Maya to make stuff for their games, and that's kind of what I want to cover. If you want to see anything that I touched on briefly, like, say, Endcloth or Dynamics, or you want to learn about compositing, leave me a comment, shout at me on Twitter, do something, and I will do a video all about that. I plan on eventually maybe doing one a little bit on animation and some best practices for that I've found. I will reiterate 1,000 times that I am a designer. I'm not a programmer. I am not an animator. I am not necessarily an artist. I went to art school, and I know Maya pretty well, and I know ZBrush and all that stuff, but I'm not the best out there. There are much better artists out there than I. But I can at least get you started, and I can at least show you the pipeline. For the most part, I might not be able to show you how to make like the coolest, best monster or whatever, but I can show you the path to get there, I hope. So again, if you have any requests, let me know. But the next video that I'm going to record is going to be on geometry preparation and the basics of modeling. So yeah, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.